Just make sure we still have, yep, there's Diane. So I just want to say a couple of things about Diane Dakers, and we very much appreciate her agreeing to come. Diane was one of those who was canceled. You know, when the COVID pandemic struck back in the spring, she was due to come to one of our regular meetings, and we had to, everything stopped, of course, at that time. But Diane is going to be speaking about the SPCA Wild Animal Rehabilitation Center called Wild Ark, located in Metchosin. And I saw Rod online there. Yeah, there he is. Great champions over there, Rod and Andrea. But Diane is going to talk about the Wild Ark's work and the people who care for their animals and how we can reduce our impact on wildlife and better coexist. Now, what you may not know about Diane is she's really kind of a whiz at this sort of thing we're doing now, happily, because I'm not. And she has been a print and broadcast journalist. She's specialized in arts reporting, culture, science, journalism. She's worked here as an arts reporter, reviewer for the Times Colonist, an on-air host, reporter, producer, editor, and writer for Czech TV and the New VI. This is a very qualified lady, and she's working now at UVic, and she has a great heart for Wild Ark and wild animals. And so we're really pleased that you can join us tonight. Thank you very much, Diane. Take it away.
Oh, yes, thanks, Alan. And thanks for having me, everyone. It's actually nice to see a few familiar faces. See, Gail pops in and out. Gail, hi Gail. Gail Miller and I worked together at the Royal BC Museum. That's another part of my past that isn't always known. And Rod and Andrea, who, as you know, love Wild Ark, volunteer at Wild Ark, and possibly know more than I do. So I may be asking you to jump in now and again, Rod and Andrea. Yes, I am a volunteer at the Wild Animal Rehab Center. And I should say there's a couple of firsts. Oh, actually, sorry, Alan, how much time do we have?
You know, you take what time you feel you need, Diane. I'll tell you what we normally do in meetings is we have maybe up to an hour for a presentation, but we want to leave time for questions. But I know you said you'd like to take questions as you go along, so.
Yeah, and at the end. So yeah, just typically I'm about 40, 45 minutes, but online it might be shorter, I don't know. Okay. And then usually time for Q&A after that. So, okay. And so, yes, this is my first time doing this presentation on Zoom. Yours was one of about 7 that I canceled in the spring and summer last year. So this is the first one I'm coming back to after all this time. So I might be a bit rusty. It's also the first time I'm going to incorporate video. So we'll see how that goes. And as Alan said, yeah, I teach at UVic now and I teach on Zoom. So I'm pretty zoomed out. I'm sure some of you are, but I'm becoming more familiar with it than I ever hoped to be. So yes, I am a volunteer at Wild Ark. I've been volunteering at Wild Ark for 4 years, mostly doing adult education. I created this program because when I started, there were children's programs, but there were no adult programs. And I thought, you know, the parents and the grandparents also need to have the information, and homeowners need to have information about how they can help wildlife and so on. So I volunteered to create this program, and I've been doing it ever since. This past summer, though, because my presentations were canceled, I actually worked as an animal care volunteer for the first time. So that's really helped inform my presentation and just my understanding of Wild Ark even further. I do outreach and education, and Andrea and I have done events together. And actually, I've seen Rod, actually, you'll see both of them in a video I'm going to show later. So yeah, you'll see them in action. I've also been a volunteer with the SPCA downtown for about 8 years. So Wild Ark is actually a branch of the SPCA. So the SPCA is this province-wide organization, and then within that, there are branches in Victoria, Vancouver, Port Alberni, for example, and Wild Ark is one of those branches, but it is quite self-sufficient, and it is run a little bit separately from the SPCA. But I've been volunteering as a dog walker also at the SPCA for 8 years now, and of course that stopped as well. which was another reason I was able to come to spend a lot of time at Wild Ark in the summer. So I am a volunteer, and I'm not a trained wildlife rehabilitator. And so often in these presentations, questions come up that I can't answer. I will, though, ask Rod and Andrea if they know the answers. And if none of us do, what I'll do is I'll get in touch with our rehabbers, and then I will send an email to Alan with any answers that I come up with. As Alan said, today we're going to talk about Wild Ark, what it is, who runs it, what happens there. I'm also going to talk about what you can do to help urban wildlife. So I have a lot of cute animal pictures to show you, as well as just a lot of information. So just I like to start off by just talking about wildlife, and who has seen wildlife? What have you seen just around your house, in your neighborhood, in your urban areas?
Raccoons,
Ooh.
deer,
Cougars,
squirrels.
Cougar? Wow,
bunnies.
lots of birds.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have owls, we have squirrels, we have deer, raccoons, all of these things.
Bear.
Sorry?
Don't forget rats.
Tasty quail.
Oh.
Bears.
Bad, Edmund, bad.
So all of these animals live in this greater Victoria area, or the South Island area, and we all have to coexist. And sometimes, though, when humans and animals coexist, accidents happen. And that's why we need Wild Ark. So I'm going to actually share my screen now. And what it means, though, is I can't see you anymore. So if anyone has questions, just yell them out, or if you want to put in the chat function and a question, and Alan can interrupt me and ask it if you'd like to do that. So I'm going to share my screen. Oops, hang on. So you should be seeing some really sweet raccoons. Is that what you're seeing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Baby one.
So I will probably also unshare my screen every once in a while, because I typically do a little bit of acting and some audience participation. So yes, I'll probably unshare now and again as well. So these little raccoons, this one here is about 6 weeks old. And this one is about 6 months old. They're not the same raccoon, and they're not this year's raccoons, but they're awfully cute. So first I want to give you a bit of history about Wild Ark. So it was founded in 1997, and it was purpose-built for wildlife rehab. And the reason it started was because the SPCA was getting more and more calls on the South Island about wildlife that needed help. And so they recognized that there was a real need in this area to have a facility dedicated just to wildlife rehabilitation. So this photo is the opening ceremonies back in 1997. There are about 20 other wildlife rehabs in BC, but this is the only one run by the BC SPCA. So this photo was not taken in 2020, but it actually looks the same this year. So it hasn't actually changed much from the outside viewpoint, but lots has changed inside. So inside this building are administration areas, animal treatment and care, volunteer training areas, and out and behind this building are several wildlife enclosures for animals in care. We also have inside cages for birds, and then once they get a bit older, then they can graduate to outside. Same with the squirrels and baby raccoons. They start inside in our treatment rooms, and then eventually as they grow up, they go outside. And then outside we also have a raptor flight pen that's specifically for owls, hawks, and eagles. There are bird and mammal enclosures outside. Raccoon and deer have their own separate areas outside. And inside a different building or out the back of a different building, we also have a pool pen. And that's for animals that need water, animals and birds that need water as well as land. Wild Ark is open 365 days a year for sick and injured animals. I should say, though, that during the pandemic, it is closed to the public. However, if you have an animal that you need to bring in, you can phone and someone can come and pick it up, or you can arrange to drop it off. I mean, there's always people there. It's just where the doors are not just open right now. It's never open to the public anyway because it is an animal hospital. Once a year, though, we have an open house, unfortunately canceled this year, which was a shame because it is our biggest fundraiser of the year. And that happens at the end of March. So it happens just before the baby season starts picking up for the spring and summer. So that's the only time that people are allowed to come. It's always very well received. People love it. And I would encourage you next time we have one, hopefully this coming year, that you all come. However, even at that event, patients are not on display because, as I say, it is a hospital. And so we don't, we have to treat them, you know, they have to be quiet. There's not a lot of patients at that time, but we care for them the same way you'd care for people in hospital. You wouldn't have people walking through looking at them. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at Wild Ark. So the mission of Wild Ark is to help sick, injured, and orphaned animals, wild animals. So here's a couple of examples of injured animals that we've seen over the years. So this is a little cottontail rabbit caught by a cat. This barred owl was hit by a car. This is a seabird, a lesser scaup, and it got covered in oil. And this poor little bat got tangled in a fishing line. So these are just some of the kinds of patients we see every year. In 1998, which was Wild Ark's first year of full year of existence, we had about 1,500 animals. Now we get typically about 3,000. So this year we're down a little bit. We're at about 2,600 so far, so we may get a few more. But it always sits in that sort of, you know, 2,500 to 3,000 range now. So clearly there is a need for this facility. So in 1998, yes, we had 1,500 patients. 2019, 2,869, and as I said, a little bit fewer so far this year, around 2,600. But we won't have obviously the final number till December. Wild Ark cares for birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. We don't do bears, marine mammals. We can help rescue marine mammals and then send them to the marine mammal rescue in Vancouver. Also no adult deer and no cougars and no wolves. There's different permits required for various animals, and these are not ones that we have the permits or the expertise to deal with, but all of these other species have other places in BC that they can go to if need be. Okay, first audience participation. And Rod and Andrea are not allowed to answer. Who is this? What is this?
Vole?
Nope.
Mink.
Ah, who said mink?
Brad.
Yes, this is a mink. Oh, you got that really quickly. It usually takes people longer to get to mink. We don't get a lot of mink, but we have had at least one to get his picture taken, but it's not as common as some of the other species, but we do get them. We treat, as I said, about 3,000 wild animals a year. 70% of those are birds. And since 1997, we have treated 148 bird species, 25 mammal species, and 8 reptile and amphibian species. Okay, and now this one's a bit harder. What kind of birds are these?
Cedar waxwing.
Who's that?
Brad.
How do you know that?
I
Brad,
can see the bands around their eyes that go back. That's typical on a cedar waxwing.
No one has ever guessed that. No one has ever got that answer.
way to
Well
go, Brad.
done. If I had a prize, I'd give you a prize. So yes, these are cedar waxwing nestlings. They're about 14 days old. And I like to show
Oh, pretty.
these particular because they're so different from the adult birds, and they're so I actually can't necessarily tell all the little ones this age apart, but once you see them fully grown, they're so beautiful and so different. Some of the other patients we treat are red squirrels, mostly gray squirrels, but we do get the odd red squirrel. Black-tailed deer fawns. So as I said, we only look after orphaned fawns. We don't deal with adult deer. And I think this year, Andrea and Rod, you may remember, I think we had 12
11,
fawns.
yeah, which is down. Usually we have around 20.
Yeah, I think it was 12 this year. So I'm about to show another picture and you're going to guess what it is, but Brad's not allowed to answer. Hey, what do you think this is?
I know. Can I answer?
Yeah.
No, you can answer in a second after everyone else.
Is that
Blue hair chick?
Green heron?
Sorry, I heard blue.
Blue heron chick?
Yes, this is a young blue heron.
That's the emu.
And we don't usually see them from that angle, and we don't usually see the young ones either. We usually see them from this perspective, and we see them when they're older and they don't have the crazy hair. Again, I show that picture just because it really cracks me up. Okay, another one.
Duck.
Nope.
Seagull?
Scop?
No.
Oh, it's a gull.
Penguin.
That's right.
Gold.
This
Gail
is
got
a
it.
really smart group. I guess because you're out on the water, maybe you see some baby gulls.
I'll leave it on you.
This one really surprises most people because it's so different.
Hmm.
And the baby gulls and the grown-up gulls are so far from looking like each other.
What kind of golf? Glaucus?
Sorry?
The
Oh,
glaucus?
I don't know actually. And I asked the rehabber who went over this presentation with me, and she actually didn't know either, or didn't want to hazard a guess.
Brad?
Brad, do you
Yeah,
know?
Brad?
I'm looking it up right now.
Okay. And also, I originally in my presentation said it's a seagull, and she said there's no such thing as a seagull. So it's a
Yeah.
gull.
I think that is a glaucous winged gull, though.
So here's some of the things that we do. So we, our mission is to help injured and orphaned animals. And how do we do that? We treat injuries. So when they come in, every animal is assessed when it first comes in by a rehabber or a team of rehabbers. So this little pigeon is getting x-rayed. This little raccoon was caught in a trap.
Oh.
Yeah. And so we obviously, as soon as they come in, they get checked and we treat their immediate needs, of course. But then also we provide ongoing medical care. So this bufflehead, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Bufflehead, yes.
Like
with an injured wing. And so we had to come up with a system to tape up his little wing. As you can imagine, you can't just go to Canadian Tire and buy a little sling for a bufflehead. So wildlife rehab is a very creative field.
So can a bird's wing actually be fix itself, or do they re-adhere like a humans or other animals?
Does it fix itself?
Like when we break a bone, they can set it and it'll reconnect or regrow. And I'm just wondering, with a hollow bones like a duck has, how you do that, and if it works.
again, and Andrea and Rod, if you want to jump in, but yes, as far as I know, that's exactly what happens.
They can set the bones, but sadly sometimes you can't, depending on which bone and where, if the animal can't keep itself immobilized, then it won't set. So usually that's when, unfortunately, the animal may have to be euthanized. And a lot of times the larger raptors and stuff, a wing or a leg, sometimes it's you won't be able to keep them still long enough for it to heal. So there's no going back. They're going to deteriorate from there, sadly. But sometimes we can do it.
Yeah, and so in this case, using the tape to try to immobilize it. Oops, sorry. So this little fawn, so again, as part of ongoing medical care, monitoring weight is of course very important. So this is a little black-tailed deer fawn, 1 week old. And this is a normal position for a fawn. And the rehabbers asked me to tell you this because this is how when they lie down, they curl up. People might think they're broken, but this is a very normal position. And she said, deer fawns are tougher than they look. And so if you see one like this, it might look like it needs help, but there's a good chance it doesn't. So another thing in terms of ongoing care is providing physical therapy. And so I'm going to unshare my screen here for a second, because as I said, remember, you can't just go to Canadian Tire and buy crutches for a pigeon or whatever it needs. And so in this case, the rehabbers have to figure out, I don't know if you can see me, have to figure out what to do. So they have this pigeon and it's got just a cloth around its middle. Back up, I don't want to step on my cat. So it's got a cloth around its middle, and then it's just a normal bulldog clip up the back, holding the wrap, and then a bit of clothesline. And so because this particular pigeon had metabolic bone disease caused by malnutrition, caused by a well-meaning human, he can't stand. And so what they're trying to do in this situation is lift him up, and so he can gradually put more and more weight on his legs. So yeah, this is my impression of a pigeon being hoisted up. And so yeah, they would hoist him up so that he can get some weight on his legs and learn how to stand, and gradually more time, and eventually, hopefully, he can go back to the wild. So yeah, you can see the clothesline and just a bulldog clip and a cloth around him or her. It's wildlife rehab is often very creative because you have to figure out a way to help this animal. So another thing for ongoing care is to provide exercise and enrichment. And so this is one of the raccoon enclosures outside. They have lots of things to play with out there, lots of activities, lots of things that will get their attention to keep their minds engaged as well as their bodies. So of course, feeding is really important. And so raising orphans with regular feedings is something we do. So here's a river otter. It was one of 3 baby river otters that came in 2017, I believe it was. This one was found in Cowichan Bay, and it's 1 week old, and so it has to be bottle fed. And then here's a different one of the 3, and this one is 10 weeks old, and so it's learning to feed itself. Otters are pretty cute.
Wow.
But we as volunteers actually don't get to deal with them because they can also be quite nasty and bitey, so only the rehab staff deals with the otters. So we help them by feeding, regular weigh-ins, physical therapy, but also just helping them learn survival skills. And so these ducklings, there's a pond in the pool pen that they can go and, learn to go in and out of the water on the ramp here. There's places for them to hide back here, and of course they get fed regularly. And this is an interesting case. Some animals imprint very easily, and gulls are one of those animals that imprint easily. And so this is a rehabber's efforts to not let the baby gull see her. So instead, she has a sort of glove with tweezers that looks like a bill, a button for an eye, and then this button to replicate the red spot under the beak. And so, yeah, so she's feeding this gull without it seeing her and thinking she is its mom. So again, very creative field is wildlife rehab. So as you can imagine, this takes a lot of people to run the facility. During the fall and winter, we have about 6 staff members. In the summer, that goes up to 12 because that's the high season for the babies to come in and the human-wildlife interactions increase. This chart shows admissions by season, and so it pretty much every year follows the same pattern that, you know, the admissions ramp up until, you know, June, May, June, July is the peak, and then taper off. The dark blue was last year, so 2019, but it still follows that typical pattern. In 2017, there was this little anomaly here where we had 200 patients arrive in February, and that was a hiberniculum of snakes. So a whole bunch of little baby snakes came in.
Oh, snakes. Snakes.
Is somebody trying to say something?
No, Fred was wondering what a hiberniculum was. Whatever that thing was.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Sure.
It was probably the garter snakes, and in the spring when they come out to mate, they form a ball, right? A mating ball, which that's why they think they call the hiberniculum. And then it's just basically a mass orgy of males around a female. Is that correct?
Oh, I thought there were babies involved. Are there not?
There will be.
Eventually.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, my understanding is that there's also a mass of babies in there too, because I'll show you a photo later of those snakes actually being released. So when they were old enough. So we get an update every week. So this was our animals in care last week. So only 27, so most of them have gone. And in fact, these gray squirrels went out on Friday. And I was part of that release, which is really exciting. So now we're down to 18, and all the raccoons are gone, and the deer have just been released as well.
So where do you release eastern gray squirrels?
So gray squirrels are interesting because they have to be released within 1 kilometer of where they were found. Because people have issues with gray squirrels, and they have a lot of misconceptions about gray squirrels. And so some people are nervous about having us release gray squirrels. And so there was a big legal decision made around this. And I think it started in England with the RSPCA, but the same fight had to happen here for the SP or the Wild Ark to have permission to rehab the gray squirrels, because people think that because they're non-native, that they are taking the habitat from the red squirrels and killing the red squirrels. In fact, we are taking the habitat from the red squirrels. Gray squirrels have adapted so that they can live in urban areas where the red squirrels cannot. So when people think that the gray squirrels are evil and stealing territory from the reds, it's actually a misconception. And actually, when I was releasing some squirrels last summer, a woman came by and she said, in addition, even though the reds are a bit smaller, she said when she's on her property, she's seen them together, the red and the gray, and the grays don't stand a chance. She said those reds are vicious when they need to be. So, so that's good to know. So, but the concessions that we've made to people who are concerned is that they have to go back within a kilometer of where they found. So we're replacing the population, not adding to it. They're all tagged and they're all neutered or spayed. They're all sterilized. So yeah, so we're not adding to the population. Yeah, good question. It's an interesting discussion.
I'm thinking the pigeons you take down to Douglas Street and drop them off there.
Come to Gail's backyard.
No
Yeah,
pigeons. Thank you. I've got squirrels.
As you can imagine, because of these numbers of animals that come in, you know, sometimes up to 800 a month in the high season, the 12 staff that we have in the summer can't necessarily cope with all those. And so we also have more than 250 volunteers who do a variety of tasks. So animal care is the main thing that people want to do when they volunteer at Wild Ark. It's mostly what people think of when they think of volunteering at Wild Ark, and it sure is a really nice thing to do. Is bottle feeding a baby raccoon or syringe feeding a baby squirrel is pretty sweet. But there are all kinds of other tasks. Wildlife chef, so imagine all of those animals have to eat, and so in the kitchen we have this recipe book. This says grosbeak and gull, so each bird or animal has its own recipe for its food, and so we have to prepare their food. And I was lucky enough to be on a shift that we had a wildlife chef as well, so she would do the preparation and help us out because sometimes it's just so chaotic trying to feed them all. But there are volunteers who this is their main job. There's also education and outreach, and you might recognize me there. This is my pre-COVID hair. Which was much shorter. We do events, and of course all of these were canceled this summer, but we have booths. In fact, I think I ran into Gail and Fred at this one. In fact, I think it was it was a kayaking event, and this was a couple of years ago.
It was Paddle Fest.
So
That
yeah,
was Paddle Fest.
yes, that's what it was, Paddle Fest. So yeah, we set up booths and we're just there to educate people and talk to people about Wild Ark and what it does. We have a spit and polish team. As you can imagine, wild animals are messy. They eat and they poop and they pee and they don't have good table manners always. So there's a lot of cleaning that has to be done. So these women are folding laundry, and we do a lot of cleaning outside on what we call the wash pad, just cleaning up all the kennels and food dishes and all kinds of things. We have maintenance volunteers who help around the site and transportation. And I think Rod and Andrea do a lot of transportation, no?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's picking up animals and releasing animals. So if someone calls and they can't bring an animal in, Rod might get a call and to go pick it up. We also have a practicum program. It's a 2-month volunteer program, and we have up to 18 volunteers a year and up to 6 at a time. We had fewer this year because some of them come from elsewhere, and so they couldn't get here. And in fact, when I started this summer, we had a woman who was here from Germany, and there was a question whether she would even be able to leave. She did in the end, but because of the pandemic, it did impact the number of interns we had this year. And interns aren't always students. There are some of our volunteers who are very long-term volunteers who have done the wildlife internship. It's very hands-on. You get more involved in the medical and diagnostic side of things, and you help with animal intake and assessment. But if you have young people in your life who are who are interested in animals, looking for something to do in the summer, they could apply to be an intern on the practicum program. So as a volunteer, you never know what you might end up doing. So as you can imagine, a lot of birds eat little worms, mealworms in specific. And so we have to grow mealworms. So this volunteer is actually putting apples into the mealworm bin to feed the mealworms, which will then in turn feed the birds. And that's one of the things that I really have a hard time with, I have to say, is the mealworms. So I'm going to show you this video, and let's see if I even can. Oops.
Wild Ark needs volunteers, and we have something for everyone, whether it's fundraising and outreach, animal
So like I
care,
said, this is the first time I'm showing a video. So hang on, I have to get back to Zoom, screen share, Google Chrome, share. Okay.
Oh,
and polish, we've got something just for you. I volunteer for Wild Ark because I like to give back to the community. I needed school credits to graduate, so I love animals, so I decided to come here.
I was finding I had quite a bit of time in the summer and wanted to do some volunteering, and I really love working with animals.
A lot of the animals in the Wild Ark that come in injured are due to human interference and human actions, and I feel it's kind of fair to come back and help them the best we can.
As a volunteer here, our roles, like, there's so many different things. You're never bored. We do dishes and laundry and sleeping, doing enrichment for the critters.
We feed and clean. That's what we
Oops.
do.
Carpentry, plumbing, putting up screens, cement work, gravel, such as fundraising, outreach, and of course wildlife transport.
I would say to a person who wants to volunteer, it's a great place to meet people. It's a great place to learn about animals. Do it. It's very rewarding. It's a wonderful group of people. I would say it's fun. Come out, try it. They'll find something for you to do. You should totally give it a try, because when you think you might not be able to do it, you find it in you, and it's so rewarding. When you leave here, the feeling that you get of contributing back to something that is so vital, it's one of the best feelings. Thank you for watching. Please click on the link below and sign up for the next volunteer orientation.
So the next volunteer orientation won't be till spring, but if you're interested in volunteering, definitely go to the website and check out the opportunities. So since I've stopped screen sharing, I'm going to go back to it momentarily, but does anyone have any questions?
Questions?
While I'm here? Oh, okay. I will go back to my presentation. So the facility itself, just want to quickly run through some of the buildings and things that you don't see from the front of the property. So there's a flight cage. It's 60 feet long, built in 2006, and it houses all kinds of raptors, so owls, hawks, eagles, and larger birds like trumpeter swans and Canada geese. It can also be divided into 4 sections. So here's the interior. So this is a heron, and you'll notice that the heron is standing on raptor matting. It's an uneven surface, and the reason that we have that for them is it protects their sensitive feet. They have no padding on their feet, and so they can actually get the equivalent of bed sores by standing for too long on a flat surface. This is another shot. This is an interior of a different part of the flight pen. So this one would be for aquatic birds. So the larger aquatic birds that need room to fly, but also need the water facilities. So this is a weird shot of, this is the pool pen. And so it's built out here. So they wanted to put a pool pen in. So this was around 2013, and it took a couple of years to complete. but it's for semi-aquatic animals like the otters, for example. But because of the space limitations and so on, they figured out that, the engineers figured out they could actually build it in the sky, but it was quite a feat of engineering, because you imagine the weight of this, this part of the building in general, but you know, imagine when it's full of water. So that's the interior, and that's what it looks like from outside. So the interior picture is here. So this particular setup is for river otters. They get bored easily, and so rehabbers are constantly changing the enrichment materials for them. But yeah, that's the pool. That's one of the pool pens. This is another view of the pool pen, and if you look closely, you can see a beaver in there. We have the deer enclosure outside, and again, if you look closely, there are a couple of deer out here, the deer fawns. So, and then we have a number of animal enclosures of varying sizes. So these next few photos were taken during an open house, because what we do during the open house is set up the enclosures as we would set them up for specific animals. So this one is set up for crows. And because crows have to search for food out in the wild, you know, there's perches, there's places to hide food, and so we put different things around as enrichment so that they have things to play with. Crows also get bored very easily. They're very smart, so they get bored easily. So that one's set up for crows. This one is set up for, here's some little stuffed otters to illustrate that this one is set up for otters. Hummingbirds. Every animal and bird has a different setup, and it's all documented, and you know, you learn how to do all these setups. So this is the kitchen, as I showed you earlier, and you know, this is set up for the open house again to show some of the things that we have to put together. So you know, you might take a bit of greens, a little bit of salmon, maybe a little bit of seashell crushed up, depending on what the particular animal needs. As I said, the recipe book has recipes for all of them, and so we put them all together. We have a facility for seabirds, and so in this case, we have a tub for seabirds, we have a drying station, a brooder pen. So this, my note says, this was set up for caring for patients after an oil contamination of a bird. So their feathers are maintained to keep dry and warm, and so it's especially important for seabirds. So any bit of oil can be life-threatening, and so we want to make sure to clean that off. And the feathers also have to be waterproof before we release them, and so the feathers are tested before the birds are released. Every animal that comes in starts here. This is the exam room. So trained and experienced wildlife rehabbers examine each patient here when they first come in, and then decide on a course of treatment. So why do we need WildArk? Well, 80% of our patients are a result of human-animal interactions. 20% of patients come in with naturally occurring injuries, and these are things like fights with other animals or falls from nests. But because of this 80% human-animal interaction, this is why we need some of the hazards. Cars and traffic, obviously a big one. So even on quiet roads, you know, so what you can do is slow down, even on a quiet road where you think there's no animals around. You know, in this case, there's a deer sign. So you know there are deer in the area, so slow down. And we've all seen them, and actually driving out to WildArk, you see them all, the deer all the time. So what you can do is just increase your awareness of roadside wildlife, slow down and be alert. So another thing that People do, and I did this too until I did my training at Wild Ark. I think, oh, what's the big deal to throw an apple core out of the window? It will compost. But what I didn't know was that if you throw an apple core, banana peel out the window, that might attract rodents, rats, mice, and so on. Those in turn attract birds of prey. So remember, one of the very first slides was an owl that was hit by a car. This is a possible scenario of why that owl got hit by a car. I can't say that for sure, but that is what happens. So this banana peel would attract a rodent. That rodent could attract an owl, and that owl could get hurt. Another hazard that we inflict upon wildlife are our big, beautiful windows. They reflect, and so the birds often can't see that there's glass. They see a reflection, and what they see is what's a reflection of what's out here. So to them, it could look like they can just fly through into more green space. So one thing that we advocate, and usually in person, I would hand some of these around to show you. These are called window alerts, and for us, we can't really see them. They're very faint on the window, but the birds can see them because of the ultraviolet light and the way that the birds see. So they come in nice different patterns, but you can get these at Wild Ark or the SPCA branches and online. Of course, right now with everything closed, probably online is the best bet to get those. But they do work. The birds can see them and realize that they can't get through.
Can we get ones with kayaks on them?
Sorry, no. We have butterflies, leaves, and I think hummingbirds. Other hazards to wildlife caused by humans, habitat destruction. So, you know, big condo developments going in, there's not a lot we can do about it, but if we are doing renos at home, for example, you can, you know, check for nests, check for burrows, check for dens before you dig. A few years ago, I have a tree out the front and it needed the branches trimmed. And so the guy who came to do it, there was one big branch, and he came to me and said, I can't cut that branch because there was a hummingbird nest in it. And from below, I couldn't see it, but from above looking down, he could see the two little babies. So he didn't cut that, and I really appreciated that. And at this point, I actually, that hummingbird nest fell out of the tree, and I have it. So at this point, I normally hand around my hummingbird nest so that you can all take a close look at it. Hummingbird nests are fascinating. They are tiny, but they're made from moss and cobwebs, spider webs, which are really strong, but they're flexible. And so when the the babies start to grow, the nest can expand to accommodate their growing size. Hazards to wildlife. Cats. I have one on my lap right now. I love cats. Cats are beautiful, but they are natural hunters, and not just of birds. This is a bunny. 15% of our patients at Wild Ark come in from cat, either bites or attacks, wounds. And cats have certain bacteria in their saliva, so even if an animal has a cat bite or a puncture, it's at risk. But that's a pretty shocking statistic. And so what can you do to help the birds and animals that might be attacked by cats? Well, you can keep your kitty inside. And so this is Gigi. This is my cat. She actually, sorry to say, died last year, but she was 20 and she never went outside. The average lifespan of an outdoor cat is 3 to 5 years. The average, you know, and she's 20 because she never went outside. And in my lap right now, I have another cat who adopted me this summer, and he's 13 and he's lived his whole life outside, and he's beaten the odds for sure, but he's a killer, and he has killed a lot of birds in my yard. And so, long story, but he got injured in the summer, needed a quiet place to rehab. And so the neighbors decided, and I decided my place was a good place for him to rehab. And then they decided they didn't want him back. And so I have him now, but he stays inside now and he's not happy about it. So another thing you can do If you have a cat that likes to be outside, you can build a catio, and this is a thing, and people are starting to do this. What I do with Salvador is I actually take him out on a leash. He walks on a leash with me. He's learned how to do that. We walk around the yard every day, and I will leave him in the backyard on a leash so he can't get the birds. Another thing we have at the SPCA in Wild Ark is this cat bib. I don't know, I've never seen one in action, but apparently what happens is when this cat jumps, it's made out of sort of foamy stuff. And so when the cat jumps, its front feet, yes, neoprene, thank you. Its front feet will hit this and it'll flap up in his face, and so he won't be able to catch a bird. As I say, I've never tried one, but apparently they're quite effective for stopping the cats catching birds. So another hazard to wildlife is good intentions. So here's a guy holding a deer fawn, and I'm sure that Andrea and Rod are just cringing seeing this. But yeah, people see babies and they think they need help, and so they might do something like this, but not every baby needs rescuing. So if you find a fawn, so in fact, again, I always set up a table with all kinds of pamphlets and brochures of information, and one of them is what to do if you find a deer fawn. And so basically you leave it for 24 hours because the mother will put the baby in a sort of safe place and leave it for the day while she goes foraging and so on, and then she'll come back to feed them. But deer fawns have no scent, and so they're safer away from the mother when they're this young. So if you see a deer fawn, call Wild Ark to get some advice, but typically what you want to do is observe for 24 hours and see if the mom comes back to look after them. These crows were raised by humans. Again, people have really good intentions, but because they weren't fed what they need, you remember we have that recipe book that tells us exactly what to feed them. If you're feeding them something else, they may not develop properly. So these birds had bone deformities and they were suffering from malnutrition, and it's not always obvious until weeks or months later when you see the bird isn't developing properly. It can affect, sorry, I'm inhaling cat hair. It can impact their bone structure and feather growth, and sometimes the impacts cannot be reversed, and so the animal would not be able to go back in the wild and would have to be euthanized. So we feel we're doing the right thing, but we're probably not. And so again, if you're not sure, you find an animal, best to just contact Wild Ark. So something that we advocate is don't feed wildlife at all. Excess food, if you're feeding them, can draw rats. It also creates an unnatural congregation of animals in one place, and that can spread disease. It also changes their behaviors and habituates them to people, so they're not afraid of people, and they go to people begging and become pests. You've heard the phrase, fed bear is a dead bear. Once they're not afraid of people because they're getting fed or there's food that people are providing, they're at a greater risk of not surviving in the wild because people will fear them. So if you're going to go feed the ducks, because we all love to feed the ducks, just make sure we feed them properly. So we don't want to give them bread because the bread swells up in their tummies. It makes them feel full when they're not, so they can become malnourished. The bread can also get moldy and in the water and cause all kinds of problems. So instead, corn, chicken scotch is actually great. It's cracked corn, but like this says, half cut seedless grapes, lettuce, birdseed, peas, corn, and oats are great. Keep if you're feeding like hummingbirds, just make sure you keep the feeders clean, or any birds, but with hummingbirds too, make sure that there are no dyes. For some reason, some hummingbird feeders are sold with dye in them, and that's not good for the hummingbirds. So what should you do? So never touch a wild animal. They're cute, but they're potentially dangerous, all of them, but also you don't know its condition. So best to just phone Wild Ark or the BC SPCA. I showed this at my last presentation, and somebody said that I could never show this to young people because they wouldn't know what that is. But I'm doing adult education, so I'm assuming you all know what a telephone is. So how else can you help? Learn about animals and urban wildlife, do what you can to protect them. You can sponsor an animal or a pen at Wild Ark, donate to Wild Ark, and educate others. Just talk about things like don't feed bread to ducks, that sort of thing, or you can volunteer. Kids often will hold bake sales or have birthday parties or do fundraising for in school, that sort of thing. Yes, these are quail. And so here's why we do it. These are some raccoons being released. You know, after the summer, we fed them and cleaned them and given them their enrichment. It's really exciting when we can actually send them back home. So this was just last week, Friday. I'm always afraid they're going to bite me because I have been bitten by a squirrel.
Well, that's a completely different experience than what we had when we released our squirrels. They came out of there at about 1,000 miles an hour.
Oh, I've never had that happen.
There you go.
Yeah, I've heard of that, Rod, but I've never had that experience. So yeah, that was just last Friday, and that's why we do what we do. Here's a Stellar J release. Is that you, Andrea?
No, that's not me.
Oh, okay. Deer release. Our deer were released a week or a couple of weeks ago. And then here are those garter snakes. And it says, active garter snake hiberniculum. Please do not disturb and keep your distance. So we put them out in their hiberniculum and they eventually came out. These are the 3 otters from 2017, and otters have to stay for, they always have to be released in the spring. And so is it 2 years, Andrea, or is it 1? It's 2, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so they have to be in our, pardon? Sorry, yeah, so they stay in our care for 2 years until they're old enough to be released. And it's always nice when they can be released with friends. So yeah, these 3 became a family and went out together. And that is all.
Why does the squirrel have a sweater on?
Oh, it's not a sweater actually. It's a bandage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he's being treated for something. So it's actually really nice to have Andrea and Rod here because they have a lot more experience than I do. So yeah, it's nice to have someone to be able to kind of back me up on some of the things I'm not sure about. Does anyone have any questions?
I put a couple in the chat.
Now let me check
Do
that.
raccoons and river otters coexist in the same enclosure? No. No, the raccoons have a whole separate area because raccoons carry disease. So we have what's called raccoon land that's kept completely separate from everything else. And once you go down to raccoon land, I mean, gown and gloves are normal, and rubber boots that you disinfect. So the raccoons are kept very separate from all animals always. But yeah, we don't, other than some of the birds, the songbirds, we wouldn't mix the species.
What disease do the raccoons carry?
Well, they have worm. What kind of worm is it? Rod and Andrea.
I'm drawing a blank.
I know.
It's a very deadly virus, and every so many years in the wild it happens, and literally will wipe out 80% of the raccoon population. I know it happened in Stanley Park a few years back that people went where all the raccoons go, and it's a viral thing that they can carry and not get sick, but they also can get sick. But if it spreads to dogs, cats, any other wild animal, they're toast.
Yeah, and this is the downside of having not done this presentation since February, because I can't remember, but there are a certain kind of worms that they get, and yes, this virus that they get.
Parvovirus. Parvovirus.
Yes, so we are very protected when we go in there, but the protection, like, so you can't take even a water bottle down to Raccoon Land and then take it back out. Everything goes to Raccoon Land, stays in Raccoon Land. And then the other, oh, here's my phone ringing. And then the other question is, how much does the center's food cost in a year? And that's something I usually know off the top of my head, but I don't right now. $1,800 seems to, or 18,000 seems to be in my head, but I would have to actually look that up, and I can.
What was the question again?
How much does the center's food cost in a year?
Down that far, but I know the total operating budget is about $850,000 a year.
Yeah, so for 2018, so food and supplies was 48,000. And yeah, 816,553 was the cost of running the rehab for a year. But yeah, of that, 48, almost 49,000 is food.
There's a question here.
Yeah, and it's completely funded.
Sorry, I was just going to say there's a question from Lynn about what's the best way to control rodents in a rural situation.
Yeah, so there are different rules for certain species. So, you know, we advocate don't kill anything, right? So, but with rodents, there are certain accommodations made, and there are companies that are registered and certified as animal kind that will help you rid your property of rodents in a kind way. Cats are really a good answer.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering. My son pulled a dead rat out of his glove box the other day, and yeah, so you know, don't put the rat poison down, you're going to kill the owls.
Yeah.
But he doesn't want rats in his glove box. So they're getting a couple of barn cats, which will undoubtedly kill far too many bunnies and birds. We're talking acreage too. So the guy from the pest control is not probably going to do much of a job there.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I know from my car mechanic is that last year she found rat poop in my car. So at this time of year in specific, they're looking for warm places. So cars are a common place. Apparently, I didn't know that until she found rat poop in my engine. Yeah. But what they say, so for example, I was thinking of I was thinking of turning my basement garage doors into for COVID, like a place I could open the doors and, you know, sit inside, outside with people. But it would mean I'd have to shave a little bit off the bottom of the doors so that they would open properly. And a biologist friend of mine said, rats. That's such a bad idea. And I hadn't even thought of that. So one of the answers is, and I don't know how you do this on an acreage, is any holes, you just have to keep everything plugged up. I don't know how they would have got into the glove box, probably came in through the engine because the engine was warm and they got in somehow. But cars, and who knew, but cars are a real thing for rats like cars. Anywhere
Yeah.
warm.
Apparently they take a lot of the stuff out of soy now too. So they come in and they eat your car.
Oh, wow.
Lynn, if I can make a suggestion, is
Yeah.
actually at Wild Ark, the caretaker that lives on site uses dogs, and there are many different types of terriers, rat terriers and so forth. And I know I had a friend that worked at Ogilvy Flour Mills in Montreal years ago, and they had a rat problem. They got 30 cats on a Friday morning, and Monday morning they had 30 dead cats because they hunt alone. They ended up getting 2 terriers, and
Yeah.
just took care of the rat problem that 30 cats couldn't. And of course, the terriers will never kill a bird.
Yeah, yeah. My daughter's dog, same thing. Keeps all rodents out of the house. But yeah, he already has 3 dogs.
What's another one, Nanny?
We had rats in our barbecue and found
Yeah.
ammonia kept them out. We put a jar of ammonia in the barbecue. Haven't seen a rat since.
And any kind of animal, if you can find some strong, large animal urine and place it around, they won't stick around.
Well, next time you get them, could you save me a little? And
I'll have the mason jars outside my front stoop for you.
Very good.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so if you go, as I say, we don't advocate killing any animals, but for example, the American bullfrogs, rats, other vermin, if you go on the website, you can see what the BC SPCA advocates for humane elimination of such pests. But
okay,
yeah, that's a tough one. Again, we coexist, and rats are just, they're everywhere.
I have a question about the center, the Wild Ark here. You said it's the only one that's operated by the BC SPCA. So how did that happen? I mean, that seems like a very natural thing, but we seem to have the only one that's operated that way.
Yeah, so as I said, in 1997, and a few years before that, the SPCA was finding it was getting a lot of calls on the South Island for wildlife. And so they bought a property. It's 10 acres out in Metchosin, and it's hard to find, and it's deliberately hard to find because they don't want people just going there, and they don't want a lot of people around, obviously. But yes, they just decided that because they were getting so many calls about wild animals that they needed to have a dedicated facility. And there has been talk about establishing a second one in Kelowna area, I believe. So again, with the pandemic, everything's ground to a halt, but that is something in the works, I believe.
Thank you.
But yeah, it was just really the need was here on the South Island.
Do you guys work with the Raptor Recovery Center in Duncan?
No, although Rod and Andrea, and when we have the open house and some people bring raptors, is that Jeff?
That's usually just Jeff, who's
okay.
He's kind of has a wildlife control. He actually has a couple of rat terriers and some hawks, and he actually was hired when the prince and the princess came to town with their kids to keep the lawn of the ledge free of goose poop. His animals would patrol the ledge lawn so they didn't have to step in anything that wasn't that royal.
I see.
And Lynn, that's the fellow, that's what I was talking about when I said there are people, and he's the only one certified right now for this animal kind certification that's humane. He uses his birds and dogs as opposed to rat poisons and things, but I didn't know that about the geese. That's interesting too.
Okay.
Other questions?
Any other questions for Diane? No. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Diane. We have had on occasion, I remember Rod presenting, but I must say I was very entertained by all your pictures and stories, and I think I've learned a lot more about Wild Ark having had that kind of a tour that you took us through, and some of the things that we can remember to do and to not do in the future. So thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the time to present to us this evening.
Oh, you're
Thank
very
you.
welcome. I love doing these presentations, and I haven't been able to do any, so it's really nice for me too.
Very good. Now, Fred, I think I was going to ask you at this point.
You guys remember the good old days? You know, that's when we used to gather and have meetings on a monthly basis. Well, at the end of the presentation, we used to provide our speaker with a gift. Well, we think we should still do that. So right here in my hands, whoops, where'd it go? There it is. It's a much sought after and collectible SPCA mug.
Ooh.
It keeps disappearing. So did I. I just disappeared too.
Special.
You guys get the idea. Anyways, I'll make sure that Diane gets this. I'll talk to you offline about how to drop it off and deliver it. So.
Oh, that's really sweet. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Before we go, I'd like to talk a little bit about next month's speaker. Before I do that, I just want to make one short mention. I've kind of become the de facto editor for our Facebook page. And if people have things that they want to post on there, please just send them to me. Or if they run across stories or postings from other sources that they think other members would like to see, again, please send them to me and we'll post them. Also, if you're not signed up to our Facebook page, please do, because we got some pretty interesting stuff being shown there. Thank you. Next month, we've got a guy coming to speak to us. I think his name is Mike Jackson. As you know, Mike is our past president and very well liked member. Again, if you've seen some of the stuff that I've been posting on Facebook, he's talked a bit about this past summer where he spent considerable time up on the coast doing refuse pickup. And that's going to be the subject that he's going to share with us at the end of next month.
Cool.
So Alan will send out the information on how to link up. So hope to see everybody next month. Back to you, Alan.
Great, thank you, Fred. So just one further thing, Diane and I guess Rod and Andrea, we've realized that as we have these presentations, you've done Zoom before, they all kind of record themselves. And so we've actually shared our annual general meeting and a presentation done by Elizabeth Purdon at our last one. We put that on our website. We might, if we do more of these, we'd like to keep this because some people weren't able to dial in tonight, and they might be able to see and get something from the presentation. Not quite as much as we have tonight, but something. Would that be okay if we were to record it and make it available to other members that weren't able to be with us?
Yes, that's fine.
That's good.
That's
okay.
fine.
Thank you. So we'll do something like that. I was talking to Tony, and it's possible we could maybe set up, and Heather had this idea already, I think, has spoken with Mike, and maybe we can set up a YouTube channel or something for SPCA, and we can post some of these things, and then people can go, if they haven't had a chance to hear something or watch something, they can do it on their own in future. We're trying to keep up with the times here, eh? So anyway, it does have some advantages. It's nice because you can't be everywhere all the time. But thank you very much, all of you, for coming tonight. I appreciate that. And we'll keep this up, as Fred said, November 25th is our next one. I apologize if I've been sending out a lot of mailings, but it's partly that we aren't getting really much advance notice of things. And if something comes to my attention that I think might be of interest, I kind of fire it out there. So if it doesn't appeal to you or you don't like it, just delete, delete, delete. But there might be something there that you'd like. So I did that again, I think earlier this evening, about a presentation coming up.
That looks good, Takaya.
Yeah, about Takaya. So that might be of interest to you as well, as I think the presentation tonight, because all of us as outdoorsy people, you know, we're interested in not just kayaking and the marine environment, but also in the land environment and all the animals and flora and fauna and things that we get to see. So Thank you very much for being with us. Thanks again, Diane. And to you, Rod and Andrea. Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a good night. Get out.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
Night. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Good night. Nice to see you.
Good night.
Night.
Night all.
Night all.